Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to a preview of Unblocked Live. We have a broadcast coming up this afternoon, but also we have a broadcast on Wednesday, of course. And I just want to give you guys a preview about what to expect today and on Wednesday, including some guests that I have scheduled coming up next week. So I just want to sort of touch on a couple of things and look at Minneapolis, because right now we have breaking news from Minneapolis, and we'll touch on this more this afternoon at the broadcast this afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern when I speak with Kim Brown. But the breaking news that we have right now outside of Minneapolis, I'll just come over here to what I was just looking at. Jury selection in Derek Chauvin trial is paused for at least a day. And this is to reintroduce the third-degree murder charge. And a court of appeals had ruled that the judge has to reconsider. Here's a tweet from Esme Murphy. Who's that? Is that a reporter? Can't see right now. But so there will be no jury selection today in George Floyd case as the battle between prosecution and defense continues in the Minneapolis Appeals Court over adding third degree. Court has adjourned, but will hear motions this afternoon. Now, this is important because of third degree murder, you can be found guilty of a murder charge without having to prove intent. Because this is now third degree. This is interesting. Third degree is only held in 3 states right now: Florida, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. What's significant about this is that a police officer named Mohammed Noor 2 years ago was found guilty of third-degree murder. That's the case. He was a Somalian-American immigrant who had become a police officer, and a woman had called him, and she had come up to the police car in the alley and knocked. The woman's name was Justine Damond, and she was from Australia. And she was shot and killed by the police officer. He was 2 years ago, this is Mohammed Noor of Minneapolis Police, was found guilty of third-degree murder and also of second-degree manslaughter. So there are 3 charges that are in the mix right now. You have second-degree murder, you have second-degree manslaughter, and then you have third-degree murder. And so the reason that jury selection did not commence today in Minneapolis was because the judge in the Court of Appeals ruled that the judge has to reconsider this third-degree murder charge. Now, interestingly, if we look back to Florida years ago in the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, third-degree murder charge was an option for George Zimmerman. And you could have a discussion, at least, about whether public pressure and the media surrounding the Trayvon Martin case somehow put George Zimmerman in a situation where he wasn't facing third-degree murder charges. He might have been convicted more easily because you don't have to prove intent to kill with a third-degree murder charge. So that's what's going on right now in Minneapolis. They are reconsidering that third-degree murder charge. And we're going to talk about this more in depth this afternoon. I'm on with Kim Brown of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. We have very different perspectives, and we've spoken once before on episode 13 of the podcast. So we're going to debate policing. We're going to discuss rather than debate. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be that. We're also going to discuss housing and property ownership and possible solutions of where we agree. There's another thing that I want to point out about Minneapolis. There were a number of shootings in Minneapolis over the weekend, and one person was shot and killed at the location of George Floyd Square. You might not know this. When I went to Minneapolis at the end of last year, there is still an occupied zone in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it's about 2 square blocks, an area of mixed residential and businesses that is currently under occupation in the sense that it's a police no-go zone. Police are not allowed. There's big barricades that say, fuck off, police. Well, there was a shooting outside of on the same street corner where George Floyd was killed over this weekend. I'm just going to share the screen with you here, and you can take a look at the headline. But we're going to get into some of these statistics. 2 people injured, 1 killed in rash of weekend shootings in Minneapolis. And this is you can see right here, that's the corner store known as Cup Food, which is right there by the George Floyd Memorial. And currently, on each side, there are barricades. You are There are neighborhood watch. I guess you could say movement oriented security who are part of the movement. But I want to get into police statistics rather. And so one way that we're going to do that is we're going to talk about we're going to have a difficult discussion this afternoon about statistics with race. And this is a chance for me just to kind of look over a couple of these statistics. Now, 19, there have been, I think, what was the Time magazine? Let's look at this Time magazine. This is about the rise, one of the most violent years in decades, the rise in gun violence in 2020, with over 19,000 people killed in shooting and firearms related incidents in 2020. Now, of that, a certain portion of that are murder charges and so forth. And when you look back at previous years, I want to go over this afternoon. So is when we really break everything down by race and gender, the number of murder victims, when you break them down to male, female, by ethnicity, 7,400 are Black victims are murder victims in the United States compared to 5 who are white. Now, there's something very important to point out, and we're going to talk about this. I'm going to have a chance to go over this with Kim Brown this afternoon as we discuss how we react to the way racial shootings with police and otherwise are portrayed in the press. This is an interesting statistic. Rates of white on white and black on black homicide are similar at around 80% and 90%. So if we look down here, this is going back to 1980 through 2008. And I do have some updated statistics as well. But the Department of Justice found that 84% of white victims were killed by white offenders. That would mean 16% were killed by offenders who were non-white. 93% of Black victims were killed by Black offenders. That would mean 7% of Black victims were killed by non-Black offenders. So I want to break this down. There's a statistical chart, the number of homicides in the United States. If we're up to 19th, this is a significant jump. Now, I don't know what percent of those 19,000 that I just spoke to mentioned in Time magazine, but you can see here the number of homicides year to year sort of have, if you look back at 2006 at 10,000 and you look at 2019, it stays the same. There is some dips. It looks like 2014 was an especially low year for homicides by firearms, and 2017 was higher. But I will go over all these statistics, including this one. And this is an important one. Those of you who have listened to the Sam Harris podcast about pulling back from the brink, when you really look into homicides or people shot to death by police in the United States, 2017 to 2021, by race, when you break that down, whites are on the far left, you can see here, they are, the rate hovers around 400 as the number. A very interesting study came out also, which showed that most people on the left believe that police deaths for people of color were in the thousands. But when you really look at the statistics, it's around 400 for whites, and for victims shot by police who are Black, it's half as much. And then for Hispanic, it's lower. And then you have a certain amount of unknown on the far right as well, which should be, I guess, acknowledged as well, because that's just as many who are non-classified that are shot and killed as Black and Hispanics almost. So there's no question that we need to address, that we have a mutual interest in getting all of these numbers down. And this is going to be important in my discussion this afternoon with Kim Brown, because this was brought up in our episode 13 of the podcast, and I would like to discuss it more in depth. Now, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. We will have an interesting discussion this afternoon revolving around policing, about Minneapolis. And again, if you're just joining us, the jury selection is being delayed in Minneapolis as the judge reconsiders a third-degree murder charge, which brings up to 25 years incarceration if Derek Chauvin is found guilty of third-degree murder. Now, that can be added in with the second-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and third-degree murder. So it certainly gives the prosecution more flexibility. And it's the defense that is opposing it, because if they can show that he did not intend to kill George Floyd, that there was no actual intent there, and you would wonder what would be the motive if there was intent, because certainly with everybody filming, this has been brought up in front of him as he was being responsible for the death of George Floyd. What would the actual intent be? So third degree, if the judge allows the third degree murder charge, this allows for a murder conviction without intent that carries up to 25 years of incarceration. And that does not preclude second degree manslaughter or second degree murder, but certainly you need to show intent with second degree murder. I'm not familiar with all the intricacies of second degree manslaughter. So that discussion is going to happen this afternoon. Please come back, youtube.com/unblockedlive. Hit the subscribe button, trying to get some people to check out this broadcast more. And it would help if you are following me on Twitter. It's right there at JLeeQuinn. The guest this Wednesday is none other than Brett Weinstein. We're going to talk everything about, I think, from Dr. Seuss to Star Wars cancellation to the Minneapolis, the current proceedings in Minneapolis, and how the press has been portraying race and police violence through the lens of race, as we have seen most of the civil rights stories, including the Capitol, which you all know I was at and covering. And if you haven't had a chance to check it out, check out episode 17 of Unblocked Podcast. I sit down with Ford Fisher, BG on the scene, and Richie McGinnis. That's four of us that were at the Capitol that could sit down and compare notes. And that's an episode on the YouTube channel. You can check clips of that as well on Twitter, so follow there. So next week we got Brett Weinstein. This afternoon we're going to talk more of Minneapolis with Kim Brown, of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. You're not going to want to miss that. And then I have some very interesting guests for next week. One of my anarchist sources from the Midwest says he's willing to go on record. This is a guy who I've quoted before in my work, who I've, for months on end, I've been in conversation with. And it has a lot to do with the history of anarchist and what we know as Antifa-aligned movement and direct action, and those insurrectionary anarchist techniques. In the anarchist scene, they use the term insurrectos to refer to those advocating insurrection who are anarchists. So we're going to discuss this because this is a guy who back in the 90s was recruited as a teenager, and we're going to have to disguise him somewhat just out of safety concerns that he has. But he was brought into the scene as a teenager and would fight back in the club scene. They would fight the anti-racist skinheads, would go up against the neo-Nazi skinheads. And it would be more or less a turf war over, the club scene or what have you. And as it's described by many of that era, it was a very existential threat where you would, get on a bus. And if you saw those who were repping white supremacy skinheadism as opposed to anti-racist skinheadism, then these groups would fight. We're in a much different situation, in my opinion, now, because it's a more populist feud, if you will, when it comes to right and left. But we're going to be able to deep dive into that. And this is very exciting. Here's a new person I've been put in touch with. There's an LA video of the police car being torched. I've played it a couple times. The LAPD finally got back to me about that police vehicle being torched on May the 30th in Los Angeles on Fairfax Avenue. I'm also in touch with the guy who shot that video, who was like, wait, this is bizarre. Nothing's making sense to me. Everything looks coordinated. The word he used was even staged. And we'll make that distinction between saying something staged or something is coordinated, because you definitely see black bloc coordination, but I'll have a chance to talk to him as well and parse that. So I'll be able to report that. Hopefully he'll come on live. It would be great if he does. And so I have some interesting guests that I'm going to be able to talk to in the next week. We're going to be keeping our eyes on Minneapolis. So please hit the subscribe, the follow, tell your friends. We're going to keep following these stories this afternoon in less than 3 hours. So join us at youtube.com/unblockedlive. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn, or follow on Twitter because we also stream there. And we're going to be up in, let's just check the time. Yeah, less than 3 hours. That's 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern on Unblocked Live. So definitely check us out. And please feel free to ask questions. You can post comments during the live stream this afternoon. And again, we'll have Brett Weinstein on Wednesday. And next week, we'll go deeper with all of the Minneapolis stuff and the anarchist culture that I've been discussing with those new guests pending. So, and then we'll talk to some comedians as well. The last episode, we talked with Matt Ruby. He's been lampooning big tech, has some very funny videos, and the tech parody Vooza. That's VOOZA.com if you want to have a laugh. He's got some good stuff. He was last Wednesday with us on Unblocked Live. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. Please come back, check in with us this afternoon. We will be live again, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Please subscribe and come with those questions. It's going to be a very invigorating debate, and I'm looking forward to it. Will you consider having James Lindsay on your show? You know, I'd consider having anybody on this show. Quite frankly, the reason that this show is called Unblocked is not just a reference to Black Bloc, but it's about talking to each other and having conversations. What would be interesting, of course, is having Mr. Lindsay talking to somebody who is so opposed. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge Twitter follower of certain personalities because I'm an advocate of what's been termed dispassionate discourse, where we talk about this stuff and break it down. I've not inserted myself into the back and forth culture of Twitter wars and Twitter, web wars, information wars, whatever you want to call it. I'm not a part of that, but I certainly would welcome anyone who is. So the reason this is called Unblocked Podcast, it's about people unblocking each other and hearing from each other. So yes, I know. I certainly know that. There is a lot going on Twitter, and there's a lot to talk about, and certainly anybody is welcome on this show. And I want to make that absolutely 100% clear that I would talk to almost anybody, provided they're not platforming some absurd kind of hate speech. And it's about talking to each other and really figuring out, parsing information and getting beyond the attacks. So I am open to everything. Please come back this afternoon. We will be on again, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, to talk everything that I just put out there in regards to Minneapolis police violence, information, web propaganda, and everything. See you folks later.